Here I am, alone in the sanctuary, isolated, sequestered. Some of us are self-quarantined, while others are practicing social distancing. Words that, quite frankly, weren't even in my vocabulary just a few short weeks ago. But here we are. Well, as we turn to our lectionary narrative for today, we see that Jesus is once again on the move. Even as we're hunkered down in our homes, we can see the dynamic movement of Jesus in the world. If we are willing to metaphorically replace our blindness, whatever that blindness may be, with a deeper insight into the perspective of John's account of Jesus' life. And as we continue this Lenten journey towards a deeper insight, the first thing we encounter is this continuity of the imagery that we find in John's Gospel. This continuity of imagery of darkness and light. Remember, 2 weeks ago we met Jesus and a Pharisee named Nicodemus as they came together under the cover of darkness. And from that encounter, Nicodemus, who had wrestled with the meaning of what it meant to be renewed from above, perhaps gained his first glimmer of insight, his first little bit of light. Because as you recall, later on in John's Gospel, Nicodemus is going to get it. And last week, in contrast to this visit from the religious leader, Jesus sat with a Samaritan woman in the light of the noonday at Jacob's well. A simple woman who was an outsider in both of their cultures, but who in the end was able to more fully grasp the deeper insight of Jesus than the learned religious leader. And as a result, she was sent out as an apostle, sent out to share Jesus' message of grace and hope and love. And today, our journey takes its next step as we come upon a man who was born blind. Hear now once again the story of the healing of the man born blind. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Jesus' disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned so that this man was born blind? The man or his parents?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents. This happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him. While it's daytime, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming, and no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said this, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and smeared the mud on the man's eyes. Jesus said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So the man went away and washed. When he returned, he could see. Later, Jesus heard that they had expelled the man born blind. Finding him, Jesus said, "Do you believe in the human one?" He answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you." The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped Jesus. And Jesus said, "I have come into the world to exercise judgment so that those who don't see can see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard what he said and asked, "Surely we're not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you wouldn't have any sin. But now you say we see, your sin remains." This is God's message for us today. May it take root in our hearts. Healing. Healing is an interesting animal. Healing can be physical, emotional, or spiritual. And it's been my experience that all three of these types of healing are dependent on each other. They're interconnected. It seems you can't have one without all three. Healing can come in an instant like a lightning bolt, or over the course of time like a long, slow sunrise. And sometimes healing doesn't come until after we've departed this life. Now, this week's healing story is the lightning bolt kind. It's about Jesus giving sight to a man born blind. Now, in this text, Jesus uses seeing as a metaphor for faith and for the process of discovering the nature of God. And even though the healing itself is sudden, the man in the story makes his way, like most of us, towards faith and understanding over the course of time, through a process of encountering the long, slow sunrise, of being in the loving presence of the divine. Now, this former beggar's openness and growth in his faith contrasts sharply the fearful, hesitant questions of his neighbors and the downright judgmental reaction of the religious establishment. So while the other characters in the story remain unchanged by this encounter, the healed man's life was transformed, and he found himself in a very different place. He found himself not only able to see, but restored to his community. Now, John told this story and used these images of seeing and not seeing, of darkness and light, to help an early Christian community to see themselves in the story. They knew what it felt like to be driven out of the synagogue by the religious authorities, to be expelled from their church home. Does that sound familiar to anyone? We've been expelled from our church home, from our faith community, from social interactions with our neighbors, not because of religious persecution, but because of this ongoing pandemic. And this is where we find ourselves in today's text. We're isolated in our homes, like the blind man was isolated. We're practicing social distancing like this man was distant from his society. My friends, we were thrust into this situation not of our own making, just like the man born blind, who found himself living under circumstances that were not of his own making. And it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to understand that this man lived every day with a sense of fear and longing, because most of us find ourselves today gripped by a fear of the unknown and a longing for the way things were. Now, that being said, there are really three questions that we must ask ourselves today as we endure this ongoing global crisis. And the first question is this: how can we take care of our neighbor? The man born blind in our story depended upon the generosity of his neighbors. Imagine the fear of being blind in a society where there was no social safety net. The man was left with no recourse except to beg beside the road. He was thoroughly and completely dependent upon the generosity of his neighbors. Many of our fellow citizens of this nation and across the globe, face this same kind of fear. And exasperated by this pandemic, imagine the fear of the poor and the marginalized, who are and will continue to be disproportionately hurt by the circumstances under which they live. Our task then is to simply find remote ways to help. One great hour of sharing is one of these ways among a myriad of others. Today, we would have taken up our one great hour of sharing offering. Now, if you wish, you can still send in a donation to either Delta United Church of Christ or Cable United Church of Christ. Or in Cable, you also have the opportunity to sign up for online giving. You can still access that opportunity through our website. My friends, the folks who were struggling before will be in even greater risk now. I encourage you to seek out and find ways to reach the most vulnerable people in our society during these difficult times. Now, the second question we face is this: how will we continue to be community with each other? Well, community doesn't have to be nurtured face to face. Especially with the technology available in our time, we can view messages like this one. We can speak with family and friends and neighbors by phone or email, text message, Facebook, Skype or FaceTime or Snapchat, and so on and so on. But the point is this: we can communicate and pray and share our joys and concerns with each other through a variety of media. And in these days and weeks and isolating months to come, it will be especially important that we reach out to our neighbors who are home alone through all of this. They will need to hear our voice. We can do this. We can continue to be community. Which leads us to the final question that we must ask ourselves during this ongoing pandemic. How will we take care of ourselves? Beyond reaching out to the most vulnerable, beyond maintaining community, we must also care for ourselves. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we must find ways to get through this difficult situation. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, yes, the same Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who gave us the 5 stages of grief, says this about enduring trying times. She writes these words: "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These people have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." My friends, by this account, we're all beautiful people. We're beautiful because we're beautiful people who can and will get through this. We're beautiful because we're formed by our experiences, both good and bad. We're beautiful because each one of us on multiple occasions has found our way out of the depths. And it's because of these trying times that we are able to now be more compassionate. You know, the word compassion literally means to suffer with. But here's the thing. Here's the deeper insight of this text. It's how we respond to both success and failure, to triumph and adversity, that finally makes up our character. The response of those gathered at the blind man's healing was lukewarm at best and cynical at worst. The response of the Pharisees was to conserve their tradition, to adhere to the letter of the law by trying to discredit Jesus. Both of these positions demonstrate a character that was less than desirable. Both the crowd and the Pharisees were left wanting. But not the blind man. Yes, it took him a bit of time to come around, but in the end, he saw the light, as it were, the light of the world, the beacon of grace, the illumination of God's love that was exposed in the person and life and teachings of Jesus. One final thought. Our hymn of response for today would have been number 584 in the New Century Hymnal, "I Am the Light of the World," composed by a man named Jim Standy as he responded to a Christmas poem written by Howard Thurman. And since we cannot sing it together today, I'd like to close with these wonderful words from the final verse. "To bring hope to every task you do, to dance at a new baby's birth, to make music in an old person's heart, and sing to the colors of the earth." And then from the refrain, "If you follow in love, you'll learn the mystery of what you were meant to do and be." May we, in these uncertain days, follow and love, and continue to be in the process of learning the mystery and meaning of our existence. And we can follow and love by remembering and reaching out to the most vulnerable in our society, by participating, if even at an arm's length, in community, and by practicing self-care. My friends, in these difficult times, may we all remember that we are beautiful in God's eyes, and that we are all being held in the loving embrace of the one who calls us, forgives us, and heals us. And it's God, and because of God's grace, that we can summon the courage to discover the hope needed to move forward. Amen.